Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this morning for our Breaking Down Barriers panel event. My name is Cadet First Class Grace Whiston, and I will serve as your MC and question and answer moderator. It's my privilege to welcome you and our panelists to this session as we continue the conversation surrounding our 2021 National Character and Leadership Symposium theme of Warrior Ethos as Airmen and Citizens. It is now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Dr. Samantha Weeks, first female to solo as a U.S. Air Force Thunderbird pilot; Lieutenant Colonel Jessica Ruttenberg, Air Force pilot responsible for relaxation of height restrictions for pilots; Nick Scott, professional wheelchair bodybuilder, ballroom dancer, and powerlifter; and Major retired DJ Skelton, the most wounded warrior to return to active duty service. Our panel moderator today is Lieutenant Colonel Victoria Thomas of the 94th Flying Training Squadron on Davis Airfield at the Air Force Academy. We'll now begin the moderated portion of our panel, which will be followed by an open question and answer time. Audience, we ask that you, as you listen to our moderated discussion, you submit questions for our panelists using the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. As the Q&A moderator, I will review your questions and share them with our panelists at the end of our session. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas, I now hand it over to you.
Thank you, Cadet Whiston, and good morning, everyone. I appreciate you joining us today, and as Cadet Whiston said, my name is Lieutenant Colonel Victoria Thomas, and I'm an instructor pilot at the 94th Flying Training Squadron. Cadet Whiston is also an instructor pilot with the 94th, and she has been teaching people to fly in the TG-16 Alpha glider for about 2 years now. Okay, so in this panel, we are going to cover the role of warrior ethos in breaking down barriers, from the tactical to the strategic level. Warrior ethos is something that we cultivate in ourselves, but it's also something that we cultivate in others. Each of our panelists have faced some kind of barrier, and then through warrior ethos, they have broken down that barrier. In this panel, we'll discuss how they have had to cultivate their warrior ethos in themselves and the role that teammates and even senior organizational leaders have played in strengthening their warrior ethos. Let us first start with the warrior ethos of self. Lieutenant Colonel Ruttenberg, this question will be for you. You wanted to fly aircraft, but you were told that your height would not allow you to follow your dream. You eventually made it into the cockpit and logged a lot of combat time. What aspects of your internal warrior ethos do you think contributed to your tenacity in driving around the nation to collect data that enabled you to attend Air Force pilot training?
Tori, thank you for that question. For me, the warrior ethos is about following your passion. When things start getting hard, instead of quitting, you do the opposite. You lean in even more. So while I was struggling for several years trying to get into pilot training, I only had a few mantras. One was quitting is never an option. Failure is feedback. Take it as a data point and move on, and never accept no as the final answer. So when I began my journey, I was entered into pilot training almost as a captain because it took so long for me to get in. And on my first day of class, they pulled me out and told me that I wasn't going to be a pilot because I was a half an inch too short. So I spent the next several months driving around the United States, getting measured in different cockpits to take that data back to fight for an exception to policy. I drove to Charleston, got measured in a C-17. I went to Little Rock, got measured in a C-130. I went to Meridian, Mississippi, got measured in a KC-135. And eventually I made it back into the cockpit, back to pilot training. But that wasn't the only setback I had. At this point, I had also had 2 other waivers. So at this point, I now have 2 waivers, an exception to policy. So I have been told by the institution through their processes 3 different times, no, that you can't be a pilot because of this reason. And each one of these obstacles took me 6 months to 12 months to clear. So as you begin a journey, what I have found is that you're gonna have setbacks, you're gonna have failures, people are gonna tell you no, but don't focus on the failure. Don't focus on falling. What you need to focus on is the next action you take after you have a failure. Are you gonna sit down on the ground and feel sorry for yourself and give up, or are you gonna pull yourself back up and persevere? So while I was doing this, I used to put little sticky notes on my bathroom mirror in the morning because sometimes I never thought I was gonna make it. And one of those stuck out to me that I still put on my mirror today. It was Winston Churchill's, very simply put, never, never, never give up. And I'm glad I didn't give up, because now I'm taking my warrior ethos and my tenacity, and I am fighting for underrepresented groups like women and minorities to increase our numbers in aviation.
Yeah, what you said about not taking no for an answer made me think of what General Brown said on Wednesday. He said, you got the 5 stages of no. You get hell no, you get no, well, think about it. That's not a bad idea, and we should have been doing that already. So I'm glad that you didn't take no and you worked through all those 5 stages in each 3 of those different instances that you're talking about, and I'm certainly glad that you made it into the cockpit. Mr. Scott, this next question is similar, and I will pose it to you about fortifying your internal warrior ethos. You were faced with adversity from a very young age. At just 16, you miraculously survived a near fatal accident. And since then, you've become a 2-time world powerlifting champion, a ballroom dancer, you're a published author, you're an actor, and more. And you talk about shifting mindset to consider a problem in a new way. What gave you that internal initial drive to change your mindset in order to break down barriers?
Okay, so warrior ethos. So it's a mindset, it's a perspective, but you got the internal and the external. So you got to figure out what's the reason for you and what you can do for others. So let me kind of break it down for the ballroom dancing. Since I talked about the powerlifting, the bodybuilding, so where did this ballroom dancing come from, and how did that all come about, like Dancing with the Stars? So the internal, I'm a bodybuilder, so I get signed by one of the biggest companies in the world at the time, bodybuilding.com. It just out of the blue, because I was trying to raise funds for a professional competition. So as I was trying to help others, the company saw value in me and they signed me. So then I started to travel the world with them. I work expos. So one expo at the 2009 Arnold Classic in March, a woman came up to me, she interviewed me. She was with the entertainment company. And then we went back and forth, but then she told me via email after a week that she's a ballroom dancer, a professional, and then she does competitions. And then she sent me a link of dancing with a guy in a wheelchair. Well, I looked at it and I emailed her back. I said, well, this is who I am. This is what I do. If you come up with something, I'd love to try it. So that's what I did. I emailed her. And then in May of 2009, I flew to Philadelphia. I lived in Kansas at the time. So it was a battle within, because I wanted to test this. But as I was doing this, I'm thinking, what are people going to think about this bodybuilder doing a ballroom dancing? Are they going to have mixed emotions, and will they think I'm not serious about the sport? So it was a battle within, but I had to accept that I am different, that I want to try different things, because wheelchair ballroom dancing is another avenue for disabled athletes, because my goal was to bring more disabled athletes in the sport of wheelchair bodybuilding. But when I tried it, I fell in love with it. I got really into it and I got really good. And then from that, I kept flying back and forth, and we went bigger. We did competitions, and then we flew over to Germany for the Paralympic Games. So we were the first couple. She's not in a wheelchair, and she's, at the time, she was one of the best in the world. But then we performed, we represented the USA for the first ever in the history for dance sport, which is wheelchair ballroom dancing. So on the warrior ethos for other people, it shows that if I can do it, you can do it too. You have to try different things to see what you like, but in the gifs of you trying things, you inspire others to realize that they can do different things too. And you never know what you like and when you do other things, you naturally will inspire others. So like, you know what, I can try it. And moving forward, many other wheelchair bodybuilders become ballroom dancers, and then some end up being in Super Bowl commercials via that. So it's a spiral effect.
I like that. I like what you said about just, throwing your hat in the ring. You don't know it and if you can do it until you try it, which is a perfect segue for Dr. Weeks. You'll get the next question. In your main talk, I know you're going to discuss an experience you had where you almost walked onto the swim team at USAFA. But then you decided to walk away, and that decision remains with you and encourages you to throw your hat in the ring for various opportunities. Were there other lessons that you learned here at USAFA that you believe added to your grit and have stuck with you after you commissioned?
There are lots of lessons at the Academy that we take with us, right? But probably the other biggest one for me, I learned freshman year, and it is something that all the cadets have already heard. It's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. And I learned that the hard way by asking permission as a freshman and getting told no. And I've struggled with that concept probably for the last 27 years. And even though sometimes I might get what I want by asking for forgiveness, I've kind of stuck with the Air Force core values of integrity first. And so I'd rather put things out up front, ask the question, because if we're asking the question where we think permission versus forgiveness kind of exists, we probably already know true in our heart what the answer is. And, even in group command heading to wing command, I remember asking a question and not getting the answer I wanted, but knowing that that was better for me and better for the Air Force and in line with my values and who I am and who I wanted to be. So it's the better way to go. And I think without a doubt, those are the biggest two things through my experiences that I carried with me.
Yeah, I think that also harkens back to something that General Brown said on Wednesday. He said, proceed until apprehended. Somebody will let you know if you're not doing the right thing, but if you think it's the right thing, go ahead and give it a shot. Major Skelton, I'll pose the same question to you, but about West Point. So what was a lesson that you learned at West Point that contributed to your internal growth of having a warrior ethos?
Well, thank you for that question. My path to West Point, I'll back up just a second, was a little bit differently. And so I struggled through high school through a couple of different means and mediums. One was academics, and the other one was trying to find self-discipline. And so when I graduated high school, I ended up taking a path where I enlisted in the U.S. Army first. Mm-hmm. And I needed, I didn't recognize it at the time, but I really needed an external third party in my life that wasn't my parent unit, wasn't mom and dad and my sister, that could help teach some of the lessons and provide the structure that I needed that I wasn't strong enough to provide internally, which prepared me to get picked up through some intervention, to some mentors, to go to the academy. And so by the time I showed up as a cadet on the first day of West Point, I was already in this mindset that there's absolutely no way that I was going to get through this 4-year experience, whatever that was. It was fairly unknown to me what the experience of the military academy was. And I needed to be open to have ask for help and have my peers kind of help me and mentor me, if you will, through that 4-year experience. But in that, you also realize that I just had this experience being enlisted in the military, and I understood the military in a way that a lot of the kids coming out of high school had no background and no baseline. And so I was able to help them in a way. And it kind of became, and we'll talk later in this panel and in other talks, where it really solidified this foundation in my head of there is really no challenge and hurdle in life that I'm really going to be able to tackle on my own. I'm going to require a team to surround myself with in which we can complement our strengths and weaknesses. And even though at that moment, as a cadet, I'm not thinking like this, over time, I had some great mentors that had me reflect back on some of these lessons in my journey on being a soldier and developing as a military leader, to really internalize that and make that a core part of how I approach life, which ended up inadvertently playing out when I was severely wounded a little over a year after I graduated the academy. That really I contribute to that lesson helping me get through some pretty major hurdles in life.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue into our next section, because we are going to talk more about that team aspect of it. And every one of you have talked about people in your lives that you surrounded yourselves with that really gave you this drive to continue to push forward in whatever it was that you were seeking. So we have considered the personal aspects of building the warrior ethos. Let's just shift a little bit to thinking about how we can help others cultivate their warrior ethos. And Dr. Weeks, this question, first one will be for you. You were the first F-15C pilot who was also a woman in your first squadron. You were the first female solo on the Thunderbirds, and you were very often the first and or the only woman in a space. You will mention in your main talk that at your first unit, you faced a barrier to success, and 3 fellow squadron mates revealed that they were your advocates, and they helped you continue to break down barriers. What made it clear to you that they were on your team? And what is your message to colleagues and leaders who want to be advocates or allies, but aren't sure exactly how to show that?
So the first part of how did I know they were on my team? They were actively acknowledging it. They were speaking to me. They were using their voice. And that's something that I'll talk about in the second part of what's my message. And it's not just to people who want to be allies, it's to every single one of us, right? We have the wingman concept in the Air Force, and ultimately humans need connection in life, as we heard from Dee Dee Halfhill this morning. And so my point to people goes to a message from my mentor who said, sometimes your mentor looks like you and sometimes your mentor doesn't look like you. And I would say that that's the challenge to all of us, is mentor somebody who doesn't look like us. And that comes from Sheryl Sandberg and the Lean In organization. So find somebody who doesn't look like you or have the experiences of you, because you're going to learn as their mentor and they're going to learn as the mentee. And then when you're in that position to be an ally or an advocate, use your voice. You know, General Scott Ployce was the Luke Air Force Base wing commander in probably 2014, 2015. And I had continued to see and try to pursue change for women and fighters with respect to our gear. And at the time, the thing we saw the most was F-35 pilots having issues. So I go to the 1-star wing commander at Luke and say, sir, I need your help. And we had a previous working relationship, and he tried to carry that forward. And he really catapulted it when he was at ACC as the A5. And I would say from 2016 to now, people like General Holmes and General Goldfein and General Brown and Chief Bass and the Wit and General O'Brien have carried that message of General Ployce forward to really embrace their position, their authority, their power, and their understanding of the situation to be the advocate for not one person, but really for a group of airmen. And that's our charge, is to actively listen to the problem and use our voice when we have the opportunity. And be aware of the surroundings. I want to say one more thing. I remember being in a meeting at Nellis and getting cut off all the time by people around the room. And did you know that happens significantly more often to women than it does men?
I did.
And the person who was sitting at the head of the table happened to be the Secretary of the Air Force. And she pushed her seat back from the table. She turned to me and she said, Colonel, you have something you want to say. Please go ahead. And she was aware in that situation. And that's our challenge to all of us, is look for those opportunities and make sure that we're the advocate or the ally for the person in the room. And then also encourage people who don't speak to hear their voice and have them lean into the table by being invited.
Yeah, I had somebody say one time, where you stand is a matter of where you sit. And it's clear that, the Secretary of the Air Force, she had probably experienced that herself. And so she was watching this happen. And so those allies and advocates, now that, you might not have experienced this, but that this is a thing, it's very easy to just turn and say, oh, I think Dr. Weeks just said this same thing or had this idea. So yeah, that's a good advice for people. Major Skelton, I'm going to pose the next question to you, and it's pretty similar. So when you faced adversity, whether that was at West Point, and this really kind of goes back to what you said in your initial question, when you faced adversity either at West Point or leading a rifle infantry platoon or working to return to service after serious injuries, how did people make it clear to you that they were on your team and that they were going to help you meet your goals?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. They didn't make it clear. And how I want to answer that is why I answered it that way is my path was anything but direct in how I got here today. And what I've been able to learn from that is when I was severely wounded, I was a little over a year out of the academy, full of energy, full of testosterone. You know, I can accomplish anything I want in life. And I just had this mindset that I just graduated a military academy. You're the best leader in the world. All of those things that we help our cadets and our next generation of leaders embody so they can go out as strong as they possibly can be. And the next thing you know, you wake up out of a coma and you're laying on a hospital bed and you're not the best version of yourself. You have these physical and mental permanent limitations that you've never given any thought about how you're going to work around and, you know, redefine yourself and what you can accomplish. And the only thing that I wanted to do was to get the heck out of the hospital bed, get back to my unit, which was still deployed, and continue taking care of and leading my soldiers in combat. That's all I cared about. And so when leaders showed up, when I started to rehabilitate and started to have more mobility, you know, Walter Reed and Bethesda in Washington, D.C., there's no shortage of senior leaders that like to stop by and do welfare checks. Well, the Deputy Secretary of Defense at the time did a welfare check and said, listen, DJ, if you ever want to, you know, if you need any help, here's my private number, give me a call. And most of the times we don't call. So I called. And my ask was, get me back to the front line so I can continue leading my soldiers in combat. And the response was from the number 2 in the Pentagon, yeah, that's not going to happen, but I can give you this opportunity. I can open this door for you if you're willing. And even though it's not directly what you just asked me for, it'll move you forward. And what you do with that next may lead you to what you want to accomplish and what your goals are. And this indirect, now my response to that was anything but professional. I was angry. Why do you hate freedom? Why do you hate wounded warriors? Why can't you help me, right? But the reality is it's very rare for us to be asked for help and for us to be in a position to directly solve your problem immediately. But if we're willing to accept the doors that do open and all the things that you've heard so far from the panelists, being persevering, it's okay if one door closes. Take a look at the opportunities that are presented, and you'll find there's a lot of advocates in your corner. And it's much easier to have puzzle pieces available to you for you to put together to have the final solution of what you're trying to accomplish, rather than deny some of these opportunities with people that are trying to help you. And so for me, it was understanding and really appreciating advocates and mentors in my life that, and this is a lesson for all of us too, right? Think about the people of the next generation that we're now in the role of being a mentor. And so just like Samantha, when you're sitting in a meeting, how difficult is it for you to call on the people that typically don't have a voice at the table? Or better yet, pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm going to a meeting. I think it would be good for you to just observe and watch and listen, right? It's especially easy now and things are more virtual. And so for me, it was a series of individuals in my life. Some were peers, some were subordinates, some were leaders, some were people in the community that wanted to help, didn't necessarily know how to get me to the end state, but provided just enough assets and resources that eventually it led to where I wanted to, because I was persistent throughout that path over a course of several years.
Yeah, that's a great point. That there are often allies and advocates out there, but they might think that we already know, that they're on our team and they're on our squad. But if you just ask, they're more than willing to invite you to the meeting or to give you that phone number or to bring you on their team. And it might not, like you said, be exactly what you wanted, but it might be a door to something that you're even better at, to be quite honest. So that's a perfect segue. We're going to go into the strategic level now. So Lieutenant Colonel Ruttenberg, This question is for you. As we talked about, you were once told that your height would keep you from serving as a pilot. But now you help shape policy as a member of the Air Force Women's Initiative team that expands the U.S. talent pool and secures our strategic advantage. What impacts have you seen on the warrior ethos of people impacted by the changes you and your team have brought about? And feel free also to talk about some things the WIT is working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So you hit on a little bit about the National Defense Strategy. So I just want to talk about real quick why it's important and then who it impacts. So if you take away anything from anything I'm saying today, I just want you to know that inclusiveness equals competitiveness and that we're in a great power competition with Russia and China. So we need to stop having artificial barriers that limits our ability to recruit our population. So China by 2030 is likely going to have 4 times the population of the United States and 15 times the STEM graduates, as well as twice the GDP. So they're going to have more money, more people, and smarter people. And at the same time, the United States is struggling to find quality recruits. 71% of the US's youth are ineligible to serve in the military, whether it's medical, aptitude, propensity to serve. So our recruiting pool is getting smaller as China is getting larger. So we can't afford to eliminate large portions of our population. So when I was starting to get into, and I work on a lot of initiatives, whether it's pregnancy or whether it's stuff that's specific to kind of build on such of the great work that Dr. Weeks, I keep wanting to call her ma'am, combo there, had worked on and continue that work. I found out that there's only 5% female pilots. And what's even shocking to me is that there's only 2% female fighter pilots. And I mean, it's been 30 years since women could fly in combat. Is it we just don't want to be fighter pilots? So I had to dig into the why. And it tied right back into my personal story that there's a lot of factors, but one of the largest factors is the height restriction. The minimum height to be an Air Force pilot is 5'4". And this eliminates almost half the female population from being qualified because we based the standard on a 1967 database before women were included into aviation. And we still use that today. We just didn't know we were still doing it. So to get to your point with the question of who is it impacted, it is unlocking the door to allow more women and minorities to enter into an aviation career field. As a service, we're about 22% women, but we're really underrepresented in certain career fields, and aviation is one of them. And the sitting height requirement, so it's not just a standing height, it's like a sitting height from like your hip to your eyes. That is based on a Caucasian male standard as well. And it eliminates 74% of Black women, 72% Hispanic women, and 61% of Asian women from entering into a career of aviation. And that standard was still in effect until 2020. So I had to find a way to fix this. And I know several people have tried before me, and we've made small baby steps before, but we really need to get to the root cause of this, the problem. And what we need to do is stop building aircraft and equipment designed for only one type of person. So we worked with the waiver policy. So when we say we lax the standard, we didn't lax the standard. We just actually modified it so that you have the exact measurements of each aircraft. So you're not just saying the most restrictive aircraft applies to everybody, because like the F-15 only allows 8.9% of women to fly. And we will still have that in the Air Force inventory. C-17, C-130 still eliminate 1 out of 3 women from flying. As a matter of fact, just this morning before we logged on, I was on the phone with another woman who just got removed from pilot training because they found out she was too short to fly the C-17. This is still happening today, and it happened to me 20 years ago. So I felt a strong need to do something about it. Not that we weren't trying, we were just having a hard time understanding the root cause. And I think we've got a good starting point. We worked with the Undersecretary of Acquisitions, Dr. Will Roper, and we pitched an idea to him that why don't we just build aircraft and flight equipment for the entire recruiting population, so that we're not eliminating half the female population, a lot of the minorities, so that we can get to, a great power competition, a great talent competition with China and Russia. And he was on board. We were able to take quantitative data and put it into a qualitative conversation with him. And he mandated that all of Air Force aircraft and flight equipment will now including the 95th percentile of the United States population, as well as we are now doing a career enlisted study. So we had waivers for female pilots before, but up until about 2 weeks ago, we had 0 waivers for our enlisted force. So that impacts about 3,400 members. So I think what we did was increase the flow of input, and I think our numbers are going to slowly come up in the next couple of years.
Do you ever get feedback from people that have benefited from the work that you've done, and how they were, can you see a difference in their warrior ethos, or even in the warrior ethos of the air and space forces writ large? When we all feel like we have the best people on the team, it seems to me that we feel like we can do anything. We can engage in talent competition.
Absolutely. So I kind of have this side hustle when people can't get through pilot training. They know where to find me, and I help them navigate the process, because it's not always transparent. And when you come in, you don't know what you don't know. And that's why these people just didn't walk away and say no. They pushed back, and it's hard to measure how many people just walked away because they thought the standard was the standard and didn't even apply. We can't measure that. We have studies showing that we probably have lost lots of applicants, particularly women, when we say this is the standard. But I get 3, 4, 5 women a month contact me, and they're leaning in. And what I ask them is, as we move forward and we go through all this difficult process to go through the bureaucracy, I ask them to play it forward, that one day they're going to see a barrier for somebody. And it won't be a woman, probably. It might be an airman, and they might not look like you, but don't walk past that problem. And that's what I'm asking you to pay me back for, to get you into pilot training, to help you navigate this process. I want you to play it forward. And I think they already have that warrior spirit, because they're already pushing for themselves.
Yeah, you got to pay it forward for sure. For sure. Major Skelton, I'm going to ask you a similar question about policy. You have also influenced policy and guidance at the senior level as the special assistant to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and now as a special assistant to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs. You have worked at the tactical and the strategic level. What is your advice to somebody operating at the tactical level who might not think that people making policy have their best interests at heart?
That's a great question. I didn't go to the Air Force Academy. I assume there's some pretty similar rituals that you all do as cadets that we did at the Army Academy up at West Point. And I'll never forget being a cadet, just thinking how ridiculously silly it is that we have to do some of these silly traditions. Like, this is ridiculous. Having to stand in a hallway and yell the meals of the day to upperclassmen at 5 o'clock in the morning. And years later, when you're in a combat zone and you're commanding, and you got to figure out how to reach deep into your gut to yell over the sound of fire, so your men can and women can hear your commands, and you realize, wow, that skill set was pretty, learn how to do that, right? Throughout our lives, we'll probably always be a part of a team to some level. And those teams belong to an ecosystem, and the larger organizations you work in, they're going to have these bureaucracies that have to have a set of protocols and policies and rules that help get an improved level of efficiency. And sometimes why we do the things that we do, we don't do back to this question of why. You're going to see this theme throughout this panel. Why? We don't necessarily understand why it is that we're being asked to do this, the silly things from a tactical level, from our lens, from our perspective. What I hope you walk away from all of us in our messaging this hour is, it's okay to question. It's okay to say, why is this possible? Why are you telling me that I graduated West Point, I went through my initial training, I led a platoon in the Second Battle of Fallujah, which is pretty dang tough. I speak Chinese fluently as a former Chinese interpreter. Why are you telling me I have absolutely nothing of value to your organization, and you're going to kick me out medically? How is that possible? And the answer is always the same. We don't have wounded warriors in the ranks. We never have. That's the way it's been. And you're like, well, why? Who's telling you to do that? And there's a respectful way to do that. And if you figure that out, and mentors will help you do that, peers ahead of you will help you do that, then you can actually map it out. Everything's, for the most part, is nested. these days. And so you can figure out which law governed which policy and which policy was interpreted, right? The Army interprets the same policy sometimes much differently than the Air Force within our own institution, our own agency. And you can figure out the language and how that language is being interpreted. And the beautiful thing is we're all individuals that are being impacted from this large ecosystem of policies. And the problem is those that sit at the policymaking level, for the most part, are very disconnected from the individuals that are on the other side that are implementing and executing those policies. And so when some of the policies just don't make sense, a 5 foot 4 inch regulation, a wounded warriors to this level have no purpose, and we're gonna expel them from the organization. Whatever those are, we all have our own unique stories, right? Whether it's based on race, it's not that long ago. Oh, you're this color, can't do this. Oh, you're this gender, can't do this. And if I can tell my story in a way that can educate the people that are making the policy, we're all on the same team. There is no shortage of patriots that don't serve in the military that work every single day in the Pentagon, in the civilian top echelon of our branches, that are waiting for firepower and ammunition and the powerful storytelling to go back to the drawing board and change words. Sometimes it's just changing a couple words that have inadvertently limited the services or a unit from acting, or scrapping a policy that's 50 years old and writing a brand new one. It takes a little bit of effort and homework, but as cliche as it is, I have lost count of individual service members that have tactfully and intellectually told their story. And there's plenty, pick a medium. You can now do it on TikTok, right? You can do it in a think tank. You can do it in a Zoom conference. You can do it in a Facebook post. You can do a peer-reviewed journal. There's many ways on your free time that you can tell a story and articulate a gap, and that resonates and is heard throughout the institution, and the policy starts the path of changing and updating to be relevant. Because at the end of the day, and I'm going to caution myself right here, at the end of the day, policies are nothing more than recommendations. They're not scripted end all be alls. Any regulation can be altered and changed. Any law can be updated. There's a way to do that. We live in an amazing democracy that can do that. But if one thing you can walk away from this messaging is, if you are being asked to do something that it doesn't seem right to you, it just go talk to the people that you're surrounded with. And if it doesn't seem right to them, go talk to your chain of commands. Think about it, study it. You don't need to study too long, and go write about it. And there's ways that you can highlight and help us collectively within the institution discover that there's gaps out there that we weren't aware of, because we want to close those gaps.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I've been really encouraged by so many different people at all levels of the military taking to social media. And they really, they want to see things go right. Like you said, like people really do, I think for the most part, have everyone's best interest and the national defense strategy in mind. But sometimes we just, where we stand is a matter of where we sit, and we just might not have the full story or whatever. And there's so many ways to get your story out there, whether it is writing in a journal or writing in an article, and there are loads of places to get that out there. The one thing I'll also say is, in my first unit, I had somebody tell me, you got to read the regs. You got to know the regs for everyone else's jobs just as good as your own. And then you'll be able to figure out the why. Like, why are we doing this yelling? Why are we doing this? And that's what Jess does a lot in her job, is ask the why, go to the reg, have a look, see what's actually happening, and then you can figure out how to change it. So I think that that's really great advice. We are now at the end of this panel time, so we will now move into the question and answer session. Cadet Whiston, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas. I would like to remind the audience that for the next 15 minutes and this portion of our panel session, you are more than welcome to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit a question to any or all of our panelists. Our first question is for Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, what influenced you to make the jump into breaking down barriers in places like ballroom dancing and acting from a place like bodybuilding or anything else like that?
So breaking down the barriers for like ballroom dancing and acting. I kind of touched on the ballroom dancing. So let me talk about like the whole acting aspect. So it's all about leadership, doing it. So if you want to help others, you just got to help yourself and do whatever you do and be an expert. One of the key things is I always tell people is be the Yoda, which means the student turns into the teacher, but the teacher becomes the teacher, but then the teacher of the teacher of the teacher. That's what Yoda is. So wheelchair bodybuilding, I am the Yoda because I'm so knowledgeable about things. So you got to take that aspect to everything else, for writing books to being in movies to ballroom dancing. So let's talk about acting. How does somebody do about that? And at times you guys looking for signs. So I was just driving and all of a sudden I was with a friend and on the radio, I heard one of those ads like, this weekend, audition to be the next, icon for Walt Disney, MTV, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, wait, this could be a chance. But my friend's like, well, that's stupid. Who would do something like that? So I was like, that is stupid. Who would be so stupid to go to that? And he was like, yeah. So that weekend I went alone. So I auditioned, there's about maybe 50 people that showed up and I auditioned and then I made it to the next round. But then all of a sudden that night, then they pitched to the package, right? So later you had to go to these specific locations in Florida, California, Kansas, wherever it was, be there, plus pay like a $750 fee to be part of this. And I was like, and this is a ripoff. I mean, who would be so stupid to actually pay? Because right, you're thinking it's a ripoff, and I'm thinking I'm not going to pay the travel to Florida and flight, hotel, rental car, all this stuff. It's like it's stupid, but it was in Kansas, like a couple of weeks later, so I went. I paid. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see if this is a real deal. So what happened was I didn't think this was going to be legit. I thought it was a scam. I showed up. There was over 1,000 people that showed up. I was like, I'm in the same boat. So I was waiting to see. So then all of a sudden they bring out all these agents, 30 people. They line them up, and there's like a catwalk, like a horseshoe shape, but there was stairs. But they were asking if I could even do it. I was like, I can make a way. Just help me get up there. And I did. So I left an impression, because what they said, again, just like what Dr. Skeleton, Jessica, you got to break these barriers. So they said, all you do is like, you got to follow these rules. What you do is you say your name, your number, where you're from, and you just keep walking. You never stop. So I'm like, okay. And then I was like, Nick Scott from Kansas, blah, blah, blah. And then I remember it's a horseshoe. So halfway to the first one, I stopped and I smelled the air like that. And then I flipped on neons and I had spinners in my chair. And then I took off my shirt, right? And then I started posing. So I went to the first corner and I started hitting more poses. And keep in mind, right in front is all the agents, right? So I stopped, because what happens is halfway they send the next person. So it's a flow because there's all these people. But I kept going. I kept stopping. I was like, this is my show, right? So long story short, I got signed with 7 agents. So that's how I became the new genie for Aladdin all over the world. And then I was able to do movies on my life that won Arnold Sports Festival. And coming up, there's going to be a Netflix documentary that's wheelchair bodybuilding. And later this year, Generation I was going to do a full-blown movie on the sport of wheelchair bodybuilding. But I took my platform and I gave it over to others. I sacrificed the spotlight to show for a bigger cause, because I'm going to help disabled athletes all over the world, not just wheelchair, but amputees as well. My brother-in-law that passed away, he's a W amputee. So my life is very diverse, but breaking down barriers, you got to accept that you are amazing and break through the barrier, just like Jessica, just like Samantha, just like Skeleton. You just got to do it.
I wish that I had that kind of confidence right now. Honestly, I do. All right, our next question is for any of our panelists. As we're going about breaking down these barriers and challenging these boundaries, how do we, either as service members or just good citizens, remain respectful, and acknowledge those that have come before us as we break down these barriers.
So Grace, can I start by answering that?
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
So I'm going to give credit to General Lori Robinson, who is definitely an icon and a barrier breaker in our Air Force and in our country. But what I'll say is the lesson she taught me. It's about the institution, not the individual, which goes exactly to what Nick just said when he finished his story about what he's doing to showcase to all amputees and wheelchair-bound people. And so when you break down a barrier, and Jessica said it too, it's not about you, it's about what you're doing for the institution. And so when you sit here and go, hey, you were the first female pilot, this or that or the other thing, the answer is, well, not really, right? Because we have Kate Landeck here who's talking about the Women Air Force Service pilots and the WASP from World War II, who really were the trailblazers to allow all of us female pilots to fly, or the Tuskegee Airmen who opened the door and broke that glass ceiling for African American men to fly. And so you just realize that you're a cog in this wheel to push the whole system forward to get to that great power competition that Jess mentioned, which is to bring our greatest capacity, which is our people, to the forefront. So it's not about me, it's about the Air Force. It's about the women who've come behind me, and it's about what they're going to do for all of those people Jessica talked about too, or GJ talked about, that we're going to make their road easier, and they're going to look to pay it forward to somebody else in some other way on some other day.
Yeah, and just like Jessica says, to overcome these, you got to pave the way. So there was other people and different things, but for the sport of wheelchair bodybuilding, there was never ever like a professional wheelchair bodybuilding. And remember when I said become Yoda, be the teacher of teachers, and I'm that guy. What it means is you got to be educated in all aspects of whatever your niche is. So I'm all aspects of nutrition, diet, competition. I've competed 250 times around the world, but you got to prove yourself that you're a leader, because only the people in charge will listen to other leaders. But as a leader, you have to listen to the people. I'm above all the athletes, but I put myself at everybody's level, because we're all equal, but you got to have their input to make a difference. So as that goes, moving forward, even though I converted amateur wheelchair bodybuilding into a professional sport in 2011, I beat all the amateurs, beat all the pros, but I had to sacrifice my career. I gave up as a professional in 2015 in order to pave the way even more. That's how wheelchair bodybuilding got added to Arnold Schwarzenegger's show. But then I became the chairman of Arnold shows around the world to eventually put it at a bigger level. But then going back, you have to have that proof, those documents, just like Jessica. But there's the men, but what about the women? But you have to have a strategic plan, because then I got women to guest post at these bigger shows. And just 2 days ago on Wednesday, I talked to the head person of the whole entire bodybuilding organization, and he finally approved women to get their professional status and actually get in the process of turning pros all over the world. And the next step, which people don't realize, is I'm working on the adaptive vision, which is amputees.
You know, this is all emotional for all of us. We are all individually emotionally invested in the paths in our lives, right? It's very rare that, and I'm sure this is shared across with all of you. It's very rare that we don't start getting into these conversations and it turns emotional for us, right? The reality is emotion's going to get you so far, and emotion to some degree becomes selfish. And so at some points on our journey, we realized that we were given access to things and people and resources that most didn't have. And two, we had to do our homework. Nick couldn't have said it better. You have to not just be emotionally invested to inspire and drive your action. You have to do your homework, and you have to figure out, how did we get here? Not how did I get here? What is the problem we're actually trying to solve within this community that we belong to, that we're trying to change? And how can we be a part of the solution so that the outcome is something that's sustained over time for generations to reap the benefit. And the reality is for many of us, we have to step aside. It's no longer, Nick can't be the bodybuilder anymore. I can no longer be in the front lines leading troops. We now broke that glass, and now we're part of the next evolution of being a change agent. And that's really it's been hard for me to do, but I think the lesson is what made us all successful and how we're still in the game and being influential is not that we were completely emotionally driven. I think that's an aspect of it. But we realized early on that we needed to be intellectually sound in principle and understanding of what the problem is. We could identify what the problem is, and we look back to see who are the other people that tried to get here that couldn't, and what can I do to just advance us a little bit more in this cause, right? And at the same time, previous conversation in this panel, who are we bringing along behind us to carry the torch when our time's up? And so, Nick, it's great. It's great feedback.
And DJ's on point. It has to be an emotional. So why did I do bodybuilding? Why did I ballroom dancing? Because after my accident, I felt lost. And I went up to 300 pounds because I was borderline suicide. But that's where powerlifting came involved, and powerlifting evolved in bodybuilding. And then I got so emotionally connected that I wanted the world to hear about it. Same thing like Jessica. She's trying these things, but they're thinking, no, you can't do it because your height. And she's thinking, why can't I do it? Because then she becomes a Yoda. She's dissecting everything. She's becoming an expert. So when people say no, she's like, well, this is the data. These are the facts. These are the stuff. Because they're not the Yoda of it. They're like, well, you do go to a point. But then Jessica's like ramming more and more and more. She's poking. Eventually they're finally like, fine. Okay, we'll have a word. That's the same thing with me. I was turned down thousands and thousands of times because I was laughed at. They're thinking, why would anybody want to see these disabled athletes flexing with their shirt on? And believe it or not, now it's one of the most popular divisions in the world, and it's growing rapidly. Just like DJ, just like Samantha, we all have emotional connections, but you'll get turned down, you'll get resistance, but that's where the warrior ethos, you got to break down those barriers, because you will be told no. And depending on how strong you are mentally determines if you're going to follow through and get the job done.
Nick, you're cracking me up because I would say that you're being theatrical and exaggerating, but you're not. I think I was told no 50 times by different types of levels of leadership about, hey, I want to adjust these height standards. But what resonates with me, what motivates me is the women that came behind me. Going back to the original question, is that the women at first, I'm kind of a hybrid between a women at first and a women at next, because women in combat just occurred a few years after, when I came into the Air Force, and that generation raised me. So I always think about them when I'm going through frustration, because, I'm fighting, for height waivers for enlisted, and to change how like G suits are suited to females. And Combo is working on the bladder relief system, but I can only imagine what it was like to be someone like General Levitt, the first female fighter pilot. And they didn't get to ask for things like that. They were in survival mode. They just needed to be the first, and that was going to break the barrier. So as they shattered the glass ceiling, I feel a strong responsibility for my generation there's still a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of shards of glass on the floor. We're allowed to be in the room, but the journey is definitely still difficult when you step on those little pieces of glass, and that we all need to take responsibility for a piece of that shard and to do our little piece to make it a little bit better before we leave the service.
Thank you so much for all of your answers. It's incredibly inspiring to see all of you enact change for not only yourselves, but future generations to come. My generation coming into service is going to be able to accomplish so many great things because of what you all have done. So thank you so much for that. Sadly, that is all of the questions that we'll have time for today. Thank you all for your time. Panelists, we appreciate your willingness to share your perspectives with us. Your unique backgrounds and experiences have enriched our views of warrior ethos and what it means to us as future Air Force and Space Force officers. As a token of our appreciation, a commemorative plaque is on its way to each of you. We hope you will remember our time with us as fondly as we will. Once again, many thanks, and this concludes our panel event. Have a great day.